I'll never forget the morning it all started. I was driving down the familiar dirt road toward my cabin lot by the lake, expecting nothing but peace and quiet. The kind of silence you can't buy, only earn. The kind that seeps into your bones and makes you breathe a little deeper. The sun was just climbing over the pines, spilling gold across the hood of my old Ford pickup. The air smelled of pine needles, sharp and clean, with just a hint of morning dew. That little patch of land had been my sanctuary for years. I'd built it up with my own hands, a simple dock, a fire pit, and a gate I welded from scrap steel. Nothing fancy, but every inch of it was mine, paid for with sweat, hard work, and more weekends than I could count. I went there to fish, to chop wood, to sit on the porch and let the world fade into the background. That morning, I'd packed my tool belt and a thermos of coffee, planning to finally replace a few boards on the dock. I was humming along, thinking about nothing more important than whether I'd grill venison or trout that night, when I rounded the last bend and slammed on the brakes so hard the coffee spilled down the seat. Because right there, smack in the middle of my lot, sat a monster of an RV. Not parked politely off to the side, not angled like someone had just stopped for the night, no. This thing was planted, front and center, hogging every inch of space like it had been there forever. I stared in disbelief. The nerve of it. This wasn't just a camper parked by mistake. There were lawn chairs fanned out by my fire pit, a folding table stacked with paper plates and coolers, a portable grill puffing smoke into the morning air. And strung between two of my pine trees, sagging under the weight, was a clothesline with laundry flapping in the breeze. For a split second, I wondered if I'd taken a wrong turn. Maybe I'd pulled onto someone else's lot by mistake. But then my eyes found the dock, my dock, slanting into the water just the way I'd built it. And there was my old wooden sign, the one I carved with my initials the year I bought the place. The gate I had welded myself stood right where I left it. No mistake. This was my land, and someone was squatting on it like it belonged to them. I eased the truck onto the shoulder, heart pounding, and climbed out. My boots crunched over gravel as I walked closer. The RV was a glossy white beast, probably 40 feet long, with the kind of satellite dish on top you'd expect from someone who couldn't survive a day without cable TV. I rapped my knuckles against the metal door. Firm, no nonsense. It swung open a few seconds later, and there she was. A woman in her 40s, with bleached blonde hair scraped into a messy bun. Oversized sunglasses covered half her face, even though we were standing in the shade. She clutched a plastic cup of iced coffee like it was a badge of authority. Her lips curled into a smirk that told me all I needed to know before she even spoke. "Yes?" she snapped, tilting her head with that sharp tone only certain people have perfected. "Morning," I said evenly. "This is private property. I think you may have parked here by mistake. I own this lot." Her smirk widened. "Oh, I'm not moving." I blinked, waiting for her to laugh, waiting for some sign she was joking. None came. "Excuse me? You heard me." She shrugged, sipping her coffee. "This spot is open for community use. The HOA says we're allowed to park on any empty lot. If you have a problem, take it up with them." I felt my jaw tighten, my fists curled at my sides. "I don't care what the HOA told you," I said slowly. "This land isn't community property, it's mine, paid for, titled, surveyed. You're trespassing." She leaned against the doorframe, crossed her arms, and gave me that look, the kind that drips condescension. "Oh, so you're one of those types. Think you can hoard the best view of the lake and not share it with anyone. Not how it works, cowboy. Maybe I should call the cops and let them decide." Her attitude made my blood boil. "Ma'am," I said, voice clipped, "I'm asking you nicely. Pack up your RV and leave before we have a real problem." She let out a mocking laugh, the kind that grates like nails on steel. "Not happening. My husband and I are staying here for the weekend. HOA has my back. You're about to get into legal trouble for harassing me." And with that, she slammed the RV door in my face. I stood there, staring at the metal door, pulse pounding like a drum in my ears. This wasn't a confused tourist. This was a full-blown HOA Karen, the kind of woman who believed rules applied to everyone but her. And I knew right then, this fight was only just beginning. I stood there for a long moment, staring at that closed RV door. My pulse was still hammering, my breath sharp. The nerve of that woman, To march onto my land, set up camp like she owned the place, and then slam a door in my face? I wasn't about to let that be the end of it. I rapped my knuckles against the door again, harder this time. "Ma'am," I called, trying to keep my voice calm, "I'm giving you one more chance. This is private property. You need to move your RV, now." The door creaked open halfway, just enough for her to lean out. She didn't bother taking off the sunglasses. Her smirk was back, curling at the corners like she was enjoying the whole thing. "You don't give me chances," she said. "You don't tell me what to do. This is community land, and I have every right to be here. End of story." She lifted her plastic cup, took a slow sip through the straw, then pointed the cup at me like it was evidence in a trial. "You sound awfully aggressive for someone who doesn't even know the rules. Maybe I should call the sheriff and tell them you're harassing me. I know people on the board. You're not going to win this." Her words were calm, but her tone was sharpened steel. Every syllable meant to needle me, to push me off balance. I took a breath, staring at her. "Lady, I've owned this lot for years. I've got the deed, the survey, the tax records. You're trespassing." She waved her hand in a dismissive flick, like I was some buzzing fly. "Don't care. HOA policy is clear. Any open lot is fair game for temporary use. You're just bitter because someone else finally got to enjoy the lake view." That made me step closer, until I was almost at the edge of her steps. "Listen carefully," I said, voice low but steady. "This lot isn't open. It isn't fair game. It's mine. I've worked for every inch of it. I won't tell you again. Move your RV." For a split second, I thought I saw something flicker in her expression, maybe doubt, maybe just irritation. But then she smiled wide, baring teeth. "Oh, you're one of those men. Think a deep voice and a scowl makes you in charge. Newsflash, cowboy. The HOA runs things around here, not you. And if I want to sit on this dock with my coffee and my music, I will." She turned her back deliberately, sauntered down the RV steps, and walked straight to one of the lawn chairs by my fire pit. She dropped into it with a dramatic sigh, stretched out her legs, and tipped her sunglasses higher up her nose. Then, like she was twisting the knife, she dragged another chair closer to the dock, scraping it along the gravel. "Perfect view," she said loudly enough for me to hear, "just like I imagined." I clenched my fists so tight my knuckles popped. Part of me wanted to march down there, grab the chair, and toss it into the lake, but I forced myself still. People like her wanted you to explode. They fed on it. "Ma'am," I said, holding my ground, "this is your final warning. Pack up your RV before you regret it." She laughed. Not a cheerful laugh, but a sharp, mocking cackle that carried across the lot. "Regret it? Oh, honey, the only one who's going to regret anything is you. My husband's on his way. He's a board member, and when he gets here, you're going to wish you'd kept that mouth shut. HOA doesn't play games." I stared at her. She thought she'd built herself a fortress of authority. Husband, board, HOA, all stacked around her like a wall. But I wasn't about to let her hide behind that wall, not on my land. I turned, walked back to my truck, and slid behind the wheel. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather creaked. I watched her through the windshield as she lifted her coffee, smiled, and pretended I didn't exist. Fine. If she wanted to play this game, I'd play it smarter, because this wasn't just some rude neighbor or a weekend squatter. This was a woman who thought she could bend the rules, twist the system, and bully her way into anything she wanted. And I was already planning how to knock that whole house of cards down. The next morning, I drove back out to the cabin lot, still simmering from the showdown. I half hoped the RV would be gone, that Karen would have packed up in the night and slipped away. But as I turned down the gravel path, my heart sank. She hadn't left. She'd doubled down. The RV was still planted in the middle of my lot, only now it looked like the centerpiece of a carnival. A big, handmade sign leaned against the fire pit. Painted in bold black letters, "Community Recreation Lot, approved by HOA." I stopped dead, staring through the windshield. Was she serious? From a distance it looked official enough. The board was trimmed with red tape, a cheap attempt at authority, and she'd even drawn the HOA logo in sloppy blue paint. Anyone driving past might have believed it, but that wasn't the worst of it. Several cars were parked along the shoulder. Families I didn't recognize were milling around. kids splashing in the shallows by my dock. Two men in folding chairs cracked open beers like they'd been invited to a backyard barbecue. And standing in the middle of it all was Karen, holding court like a self-appointed queen. She was waving her iced coffee around as she spoke, sunglasses flashing, her laugh cutting across the lot. "You see," she told a group of neighbors, "the board wants us to make use of unused spaces. It keeps the community lively. Why let a lot just sit empty when everyone could enjoy it?" Empty? I gripped the steering wheel so tight my knuckles ached. This was my land, my sanctuary, and she was calling it unused. I parked hard, slammed the truck door, and walked straight toward her. Heads turned as I approached. A few neighbors shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, as if realizing the man who actually owned this place had just arrived. Karen spotted me, and that smirk of hers widened. "Well, if it isn't the cowboy," she called. "Everybody meet John. He thinks he's got special rights to this land, but the HOA says otherwise." She gestured at the fake sign like it was gospel truth. I planted my boots in the gravel. "That sign is a lie. This lot isn't community land. It's private property. Mine, bought and paid for. And if you're all sitting here because Karen told you otherwise, you've been misled." The group went quiet. One of the men in folding chairs cleared his throat and looked away. A woman with two kids whispered something and began gathering up their towels, but Karen just laughed. "Oh, please, don't listen to him. He's been trying to keep this view all to himself for years. The HOA knows the rules better than he does. And if he really owned it, why would the board let us be here?" She leaned closer to me, lowering her voice so only I could hear. "Face it, John. I've been in this community longer than you. People trust me. They'll take my word over yours every time." I stared at her, fighting to keep my voice steady. "You can fake signs, you can throw parties, you can lie to the neighbors, but the deed doesn't lie, and when I bring the sheriff back here, you're going to wish you hadn't played this game." She tilted her head, feigning innocence. "Sheriff? What sheriff? I don't see anyone here but you, and right now, you look like the guy trying to ruin everyone's fun. Careful, cowboy. People might start calling you the troublemaker." That cut deep, not because it was true, but because I could see a few neighbors already frowning, unsure who to believe. Karen was twisting the story, framing herself as the generous one, and me as the selfish outsider. I clenched my jaw, turned on my heel, and walked back to my truck. I could feel her eyes burning into my back, her laugh following me like a thorn in my ear. She thought she'd won that round. She thought her fake authority, her forged signs, and her sweet talk would keep the crowd on her side. But as I drove away, one thing was clear. If she wanted to play dirty, I was done playing nice. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that ridiculous sign, Community Recreation Lot, approved by HOA. And I saw strangers sitting on my dock, grilling burgers like it was their God-given right. By sunrise, I'd had enough. If Karen was going to hide behind the HOA, then it was time I went straight to the source. The HOA office sat at the front of the lakeside development, a squat one-story building with tan siding and a shiny new sign out front that read Lakeview Estates HOA in bold letters. They had planted a row of geraniums along the walkway, but it still looked more like a dentist's office than anything else. I pushed through the glass door and was hit with the faint smell of lemon cleaner. The place was too quiet, the kind of quiet that felt staged. Behind the front desk sat a woman in her 60s with sharp glasses perched on the end of her nose. Her hair was sprayed stiff, her smile stretched a little too wide. A plastic badge pinned to her sweater read, "Linda, Administrative Assistant." "Good morning," she chirped. "How can I help you?" I planted both palms on the counter. "Yeah, you can explain why there's a 40-foot RV parked on my private lot down by the lake and why someone claims you gave them permission to be there." Her eyebrows shot up, but her smile didn't falter. "Oh, well, if you're referring to the temporary use policy, that applies to unclaimed spaces only. We do allow residents to make use of open lots." "This isn't an open lot," I cut in, my voice rising despite myself. "Lot 47, down by the water, that's mine. Bought, paid, deeded, and surveyed. I've got the papers to prove it." For a moment, her smile wavered. Then it snapped back into place, tighter this time. "Well, I'm not sure what arrangement might have been made, but you'll need to take this up with the board directly. I can see if the president is available." "Do that," I said flatly. She picked up the phone with slow, deliberate movements, speaking in a hushed tone I couldn't quite catch. A minute later, a door at the back of the office opened, and out walked a man in his late 50s. He wore a pale green polo shirt tucked into khaki pants. The kind of outfit that screams I'm in charge of something, but it's not nearly as important as I think it is. His hair was thinning, slicked back, and he had the kind of polished smile I've come to associate with used car salesmen. "Good morning," he said warmly, extending a hand I had no interest in shaking. "I'm Robert Jenkins, president of the HOA. What seems to be the problem?" "The problem," I said, stepping closer, "is that one of your residents is parked on my private property, running a circus out of her RV, and she claims you gave her permission. Care to explain that?" He tilted his head, clasping his hands in front of him. "Well, technically our community guidelines allow residents to make use of open lots for temporary recreational purposes. We like to encourage open lots," I cut in again. "Not owned lots. There's a difference. And mine isn't open. I have the deed in my truck right now if you'd like to see it. Your HOA doesn't own 1 inch of my land, and you don't get to hand out permission slips to trespass." His smile faltered for the first time. A flicker of annoyance passed over his face before he smoothed it away. "Now, let's not get heated," he said, his tone dripping with calm condescension. "Our goal is to maintain harmony within the community. I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding." "Don't give me that line," I snapped. "Your idea of harmony is letting an entitled woman squat on my property while you look the other way. I'm not interested in harmony. I'm interested in my land being respected. So, here's what's going to happen. Either you tell her to move that RV today, or I'll go through the sheriff's office. And I guarantee you won't like the paperwork that follows." Robert's jaw tightened, though he still tried to keep that fake calm tone. "Perhaps we should review the documents together," and I reached into my back pocket and pulled out a folded survey map, along with a copy of my deed. I slapped them on the counter between us. "There's the survey, there's the deed. Both say my name, not yours. So tell me again why your HOA is meddling in my affairs." For a long moment, he didn't answer. He just stared at the papers, lips pressed tight. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I'll speak with her," he said carefully. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding." I gathered up the papers and slid them back into my pocket. "Good. Do that," I said. "Because the next time I come back here, it won't be to talk. It'll be with the sheriff and a tow truck, and I won't ask nicely again." Without waiting for a reply, I turned on my heel and walked out. The door slammed behind me, and I stepped back into the fresh air. The sun was bright overhead, but I felt none of its warmth. My blood was still boiling. Karen thought she had the HOA behind her. Maybe she did, but after today she'd learned that their fake authority stopped cold where my deed began. I half expected the RV to be gone when I drove back out the next day. After the showdown at the HOA office, I figured Robert Jenkins would have at least had the sense to tell Karen to clear out. But when I pulled up, my stomach dropped. Not only was the RV still there, it looked like she was setting up permanent camp. A plastic patio set had sprouted beside the rig, complete with a rainbow umbrella stabbing into the ground. A smoker grill puffed lazy curls of hickory smoke into the air, the smell of ribs carrying all the way to the road. And scattered around the lot were lawn games, cornhole boards, a badminton net, even one of those inflatable kiddie pools half filled with water. I just sat there behind the wheel, jaw clenched. She wasn't leaving. She was digging in. Karen herself appeared a moment later, striding around like she owned the place, oversized sunglasses covering half her face, a floppy sun hat perched on her head. She carried a clipboard, yes, a clipboard, like she was supervising a construction site. The clipboard had papers on it too. She stopped near the fake HOA sign she'd propped up the day before, adjusted it so it faced the road more squarely, and started chatting with a couple unloading chairs from their SUV. "Just set them up anywhere," she said cheerfully. "The board loves seeing neighbors enjoy the space. Don't worry about old John. He's just territorial." I killed the engine and climbed out. Gravel crunched under my boots as I marched toward her. "Karen." She turned, that fake sweet smile spreading across her face like butter on hot toast. "Well, well," she said, "back to spoil the fun again. This isn't fun. This is trespassing. Didn't the HOA tell you to move? Her laugh rang out, loud enough for everyone within earshot. Oh, honey, they didn't tell me anything of the sort. In fact, Robert said there might have been a misunderstanding, and until that gets cleared up, I'm perfectly within my rights to stay. Misunderstanding? I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. The only misunderstanding here is you thinking you can plant your circus on land that doesn't belong to you. She tilted her head, lips curling in mock pity. Oh, John, you can puff your chest all you want, but people like you always burn out. Meanwhile, the community's enjoying this space like it should have been enjoyed all along. Just look around. And damn it, she was right, at least on the surface. Families were spread out across my lot, tossing beanbags, grilling, laughing. To them, it looked like a block party. To me, it looked like an invasion. Don't worry, Karen added with a smirk. If you play nice, I might even save you a plate of ribs. The laughter from a nearby group stung worse than her words. She was turning this into a performance, making me the villain of her little stage play. I leaned in close, my voice steady but sharp as broken glass. Enjoy it while it lasts, because when the sheriff shows up, all of this, I gestured at the chaos, the grill smoke, the fake sign, is going to disappear faster than you can say illegal. She didn't flinch, didn't back down, just smirked wider. We'll see, cowboy, we'll see. I walked back to my truck, fists clenched so tight my nails dug crescents into my palms. The laughter and music behind me carried like an echo of mockery. Karen wasn't just trespassing now, she was challenging me outright, daring me to act. And she was about to find out. I wasn't bluffing. By the next morning, I'd had enough. Karen wasn't just poking the bear anymore, she was dragging the whole neighborhood into her circus. If the HOA wasn't going to shut it down, then it was time to bring in the people who actually had authority. I called the sheriff's office just after breakfast, explained the situation in clear terms: private property, trespassing, refusal to leave. The dispatcher told me a deputy would be out before noon. When the squad car finally rolled down the gravel road, I felt a surge of relief. Maybe now, finally, this nonsense would end. Deputy Mark Holloway stepped out, a tall guy in his 40s, broad shoulders, mirrored sunglasses, his uniform crisp in the August heat. I'd seen him around before, solid reputation, no nonsense. He greeted me with a firm nod. Mr. Parker? That's me, I said, shaking his hand. Thanks for coming. It's right down this way. We walked toward the lot. Even from a distance, you could hear the music thumping. Karen had added a pair of outdoor speakers since yesterday. Kids were splashing in that kiddie pool, folks were lounging on my dock, and the grill smoke rolled thick and heavy. When the squad car pulled in behind us, the party didn't stop. No one scrambled, no one looked nervous. That's how brazen Karen had gotten. She spotted us as we approached and set her sunglasses higher on her nose. Then she strutted over like she owned the sheriff too. Well, deputy, she said, voice sweet as pie, so glad you could make it. What brings you out here today? I nearly choked. The gall of this woman. Afternoon, ma'am, Holloway said evenly. I'm here regarding a property dispute. Mr. Parker here tells me this lot belongs to him. Karen put a hand to her chest, feigning shock. Oh, heavens, that again? She turned to the gathering crowd, because of course people were circling, watching this unfold like free entertainment. Neighbors, we all know the HOA approved this lot for community use. Isn't that right? A few heads nodded. Some murmured agreement. My blood boiled hotter. Deputy, I said sharply, pulling the folded deed and survey map from my pocket. Here's the proof. Lot 47 is mine. Paid for, recorded with the county. She has no claim here. Holloway took the papers, studied them carefully, then looked at Karen. Do you have any documentation saying otherwise? Karen flashed that smug smile. Of course I do. HOA approval. Robert Jenkins himself said we could use the space. She held up her clipboard like it was the Constitution. Right here, deputy. Holloway took the papers, brows furrowed. He flipped through them, a printout of community guidelines, some vague policy about recreational use of unclaimed lots, and a letter with the HOA letterhead saying the board encouraged neighborly activities. He handed it back with a sigh. Ma'am, this doesn't override a deeded property title, but, he paused, choosing his words carefully, This looks like a civil dispute between you and the HOA. I can't just haul folks off without a court order." My stomach dropped. "You're telling me she can keep trespassing?" "I'm telling you," he said, voice firm but sympathetic, "that unless there's criminal damage or refusal after a formal trespass notice, this falls into civil court territory. Best route is to file for an injunction. Then we can enforce." Karen beamed like she'd just won the Super Bowl. "See, John? Even the sheriff says you can't boss people around." I stepped closer, my voice low but hard as steel. "Don't celebrate too quick." "This isn't over." Holloway put a hand on my shoulder. "I'll file a report. That way there's a paper trail, but you'll want to get your lawyer involved." I nodded stiffly, though every muscle in me screamed for action. As Holloway walked back to his car, Karen leaned in with that venomous smile. "Court order, huh? Well, good luck with that." In the meantime, she spread her arms, taking in the chaos behind her. "We'll keep enjoying ourselves." I watched the squad car roll away. My jaw locked so tight it hurt. The crowd cheered, clapped Karen on the back, handed her a plate of ribs like she was queen of the county. But inside, I wasn't broken, not yet. If anything, I was more resolved than ever. Karen thought that the law was on her side, but all the sheriff had really done was give me the roadmap to take her down for good. When the sheriff's cruiser disappeared down the road, Karen strutted back toward her little empire like she'd just been crowned queen. The crowd followed her lead, laughing and hollering, as though the whole thing had been some grand victory parade. I stood there, fists balled at my sides, fighting the urge to snap. But I didn't. Not this time. Instead, I walked back to my truck, got in, and drove off without a word. Because I'd learned something important in that moment. Karen wasn't just bold, she was emboldened, and that made her dangerous. By the following weekend, the transformation was complete. What had started as one RV now looked like a full-on campground. 3 more rigs had pulled in beside hers. Tents sprouted between the trees like mushrooms after a rainstorm. Someone dragged in a battered pontoon boat and tied it to my dock, its motor coughing to life each afternoon as groups headed out across the lake. And every night, the noise carried. Music, shouting, bonfires roaring high enough to spark worry in the dry grass. Karen held court at the center of it all, always in her sun hat, always with her clipboard, strutting from one group to the next like some self-appointed mayor. The worst part? She'd managed to rally real support. "John's never even here half the year," I overheard her telling a cluster of folks one afternoon as I watched from the road. "What good is a lot that just sits empty? We're bringing life back into this place. Community spirit. Isn't that what the HOA is supposed to be about?" And damned if some of them didn't nod along. Too caught up in free BBQ and lake access to care about property lines. It was like fighting a wildfire with a garden hose. But I wasn't about to give up. I drove straight into town and sat down with my lawyer, Mark Turner. He'd been practicing law in this county for 30 years. Gruff, no nonsense, the kind of guy who kept files stacked high enough to swallow his whole desk. He listened quietly as I laid it all out. The RV, the HOA letter, the sheriff's visit, Karen's growing encampment. When I finally finished, he leaned back, tapping a pen against his notepad. "Well, John," he said, "what you've got here is classic encroachment mixed with HOA mismanagement. She's squatting with flimsy backing, and the sheriff's right. Without a formal injunction, their hands are tied. But once we get that order, it'll be a whole different story." "Can we get one fast?" I asked. He smirked. "As fast as the courts allow, which isn't lightning speed, but I can put some heat under it." In the meantime, he slid the pen behind his ear. "You stay calm. Don't confront her alone. Everything she's doing, we document. Photos, videos, dates, times. That paper trail will bury her." It wasn't the quick fix I wanted, but it was a plan, a real plan. So, that's what I did. Every evening, I parked my truck up on the ridge with my camera, snapped shots of the campers, the fires, the cars blocking the road. Took video of the music blasting past midnight, the drunk shouts carrying across the lake, and each time I pressed that shutter button, I thought, "Your days are numbered, Karen." But Karen wasn't about to make it easy. One afternoon, as I stood on the edge of the property line with my phone raised, she spotted me. "Hey, everybody," she shouted, her voice carrying clear over the music. Smile! John's making his creepy little home movies again. A wave of laughter broke out. A few people even posed for the camera, drinks raised high like it was a group photo. I lowered my phone slowly, my jaw tight. Karen smirked at me from across the lot, raising her glass in a mocking toast. That was her game now, turning me into the outsider, making me look like the bitter old man while she played the role of benevolent hostess. But she didn't realize something. She thought she was humiliating me. What she was really doing was handing me evidence. Every photo, every clip, every witness laughing along, that was all going to turn against her. She just didn't know it yet. By the second week of Karen's little takeover, it stopped being an annoyance and started being a threat. The party atmosphere had gone from rowdy to reckless. Cars lined the road, blocking neighbors' driveways. Trash overflowed from plastic bins and blew across the grass into the lake. Beer bottles clinked underfoot if you dared walk near the dock. And the fires? God, the fires. Every night, they built them higher. Bonfires so big they threw shadows across the water, sparks leaping into the dry summer air. All it would take was one gust of wind, one ember landing in the wrong patch of brush, and the whole ridge could go up like kindling. I kept telling myself to hold steady. Mark, my lawyer, had filed the injunction paperwork. It was moving forward. I just needed patience. But watching my property turned into a carnival ground while danger spread like wildfire, that patience was hanging by a thread. The thread finally snapped one Saturday night. I was up on the ridge again, camera in hand, documenting as usual. But this time, the music was louder than ever, some pounding bass that rattled the windows of my truck. A group of teenagers stumbled around with fireworks, laughing as they shot bottle rockets into the air over the water. And then I saw it. One rocket misfired, arcing sideways instead of up. It zipped across the grass and smacked into the side of my cabin. My heart stopped. The rocket fizzled harmlessly, but that didn't matter. That was it. That was the line. I didn't even realize I was moving until I was halfway down the slope, camera forgotten in the dirt behind me. My boots pounded the gravel as I stormed across the lot, through the crush of campers and lawn chairs, straight toward the blaze of the bonfire where Karen held court. Enough, I bellowed, my voice cutting through the music like a gunshot. Heads turned, conversations hushed. Even the music stuttered as someone fumbled with the speaker. I stopped right at the edge of the firelight, my chest heaving. This is my land, my cabin, and I am done watching you destroy it. Karen rose slowly from her folding chair, wine glass in hand, that smirk plastered across her face. Well, look who finally came down from his perch. I jabbed a finger at her. One more firework. One more bonfire that close to the brush, and I swear, I'll have the fire marshal out here so fast you won't know what hit you. A ripple went through the crowd, nervous laughter, muttered voices. But Karen didn't flinch. She stepped closer, her voice dripping mockery. You hear that, folks? Sheriff Parker thinks he's the law now. Should we salute? More laughter, louder this time. Do you even hear yourself? I snapped. You're putting lives at risk. Kids running around drunk, fireworks near a cabin, bonfires in a drought. This isn't community spirit, Karen. It's negligence. And when someone gets hurt, it'll be on you. For the first time, a flicker of doubt crossed a few faces in the crowd. A woman pulled her toddler closer. A man stubbed out his cigarette nervously. But Karen wasn't backing down. Oh, please, she said, waving dismissively. No one's hurt. Everyone's having fun. You're just bitter because nobody wants you here. You're the outsider, John. You always have been. That one hit me hard. And I could see it worked. The crowd murmured in agreement, their loyalty teetering back toward her side. I took a deep breath, forcing steel into my voice. You can call me whatever you want, but mark my words, this ends soon. And when it does, every one of you will wish you hadn't hitched your wagon to her. Karen raised her glass high. Cheers to that, neighbors. To freedom, fun, and ignoring cranky old men. The crowd roared with laughter and applause. The music blasted back to life. Just like that, my words were drowned out by the chaos again. I turned on my heel and walked back through the darkness, my blood boiling hot enough to match their fire. But as I climbed the ridge, a thought struck me, one I hadn't considered before. Karen wasn't just reckless. She was dangerous, not just to me, but to everyone here. And if the court order didn't land soon, something far worse than trespassing was bound to happen. That night, as the bonfire smoke drifted across the lake, I sat in my cabin staring at the ceiling, listening to the thumping bass echo through the trees. I realized this wasn't just about property anymore. It was about control, about survival, and I was done playing defense. The Monday after that bonfire confrontation, things began to change. At first, I didn't notice. The camp still buzzed with laughter. Music still drifted through the trees. Karen still strutted around in her wide-brimmed hat, clipboard in hand, like she was running some kind of summer festival. But if you paid attention, really looked at the people behind the noise, cracks had begun to form. A couple I didn't recognize packed up their tent early that morning, muttering under their breath as they wrestled their gear into the trunk of a rusty sedan. Later, I spotted another family rolling their RV out of the lot before noon, leaving tire tracks in the dirt and a fire pit still smoking. And when I stopped by the diner in town for lunch, I overheard whispers at the next booth. "That HOA woman's gonna get somebody hurt," one man said. "Did you see the size of that fire?" "Yeah," his companion replied, shaking her head. "Whole ridge could have burned down. She's acting like she owns the place." They didn't know I was listening, but I left that diner with a small ember of hope flickering in my chest. Karen had always thrived on perception. Control the story, control the people. But now, that story was slipping. By midweek, I had proof. I came home from town to find a note taped to my cabin door. No name, just shaky handwriting scrawled across a piece of notebook paper. "John, you're right. This has gone too far. If you need witnesses, call us. We've seen enough." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Quiet support was building. Folks might not confront Karen outright, but they were paying attention. And Karen, in her arrogance, gave me exactly what I needed next. That Friday, she called an HOA meeting, right there on my lot. Folding chairs arranged in a circle, a whiteboard propped against a cooler. She stood at the front like some self-appointed chairwoman, scribbling notes, while a dozen neighbors sat fanning themselves in the heat. I stood back on the ridge, phone in hand, recording every second. "First order of business," Karen announced, voice ringing out. "We are proposing permanent community use of this lot. Since Mr. Thompson doesn't use it responsibly, it should be designated shared space. A commons, if you will, a place for gatherings, parties, and recreation." Applause broke out, but not from everyone. One older gentleman raised a hand. "That's not how property works, Karen." "Don't interrupt," she snapped. "I have the floor." "No, you don't," he said firmly. "You can't just seize someone's land because you feel like it." A murmur rippled through the group. Some nodded. Others looked away, uncomfortable. Karen's smile faltered, just for a second. But she recovered, launching into another speech about community rights and majority consensus. She was so wrapped up in her performance, she didn't realize the damage she was doing. Every word, every claim was another nail in her coffin, recorded clean on my phone. That night, I sent the video straight to Mark, my lawyer. He called me the next morning, practically laughing through the receiver. "John, this is gold. She just admitted on record to trying to seize your property under false authority. Judges eat this kind of thing up. This isn't just trespassing anymore. It's attempted theft. With the injunction already moving, this video pushes us over the top." For the first time in weeks, I felt like the tide had turned. But Karen, she didn't see it. The next day, she doubled down again, hauled in a stage, an actual stage, complete with speakers and a banner that read, HOA Summer Freedom Fest. I stood there watching as crews of her supporters hammered posts into the ground, stringing up lights across my lot. She thought she was untouchable, thought the sheriff wouldn't step in, thought the courts moved too slow. What she didn't know was that her arrogance had just given me all the ammunition I needed, because soon, very soon, this circus would end. And when it did, it wouldn't just cost her pride, it would cost her everything. It happened on a Tuesday morning. I'd barely finished my first cup of coffee when the phone rang. Mark's voice crackled on the line, brimming with satisfaction. "John," he said, "we got it. The injunction is signed. You're officially protected. Karen and her circus are done." I set the mug down, my hands trembling slightly. "You're sure?" "Positive. Court orders clear as day. They're trespassing." And I've already faxed a copy to the sheriff's office. They're sending someone out this afternoon. For a moment, I just sat there in silence, letting it sink in. Weeks of tension, nights of pounding music, the endless parade of strangers tearing up my land. It was finally about to end. By noon, a squad car rolled up the gravel road. Sheriff Daniels stepped out, sunglasses glinting in the sunlight, a stack of papers in his hand. He was a big man, built like a lineman, and not the type anyone wanted to test. "John," he greeted with a nod, "got the order right here. Let's take a walk." We came down the ridge together. From the distance, Karen's camp looked the same as ever. Music blasting, smoke curling from grills, kids splashing in the lake. But the mood shifted fast when the sheriff's boots crunched into the dirt lot. Karen spotted us and marched forward, her hat tilted just so, her lips curled into a smirk. "Well, well, if it isn't the property police." "Sheriff, are you here to join the party?" Daniels didn't waste time. He held up the paperwork. "Karen Miller, this here's a court injunction. Effective immediately, you and anyone else camping on this lot are trespassing. You're ordered to vacate the premises." Her smirk faltered. "That's ridiculous. We're the HOA. We voted—" "You don't vote away a man's deed," Daniels interrupted flatly. "The judge has spoken. Pack it up. Now." For a moment, the whole camp froze. People glanced at each other, murmuring nervously. A few began quietly folding chairs and loading coolers into cars. But Karen wasn't ready to concede. She planted her hands on her hips. "This is harassment. We're not criminals. You can't just—" "I can," Daniel said, voice like granite. "And I will. I've got authority of the court behind me. You've got 15 minutes before I start writing citations and calling for tow trucks." The crowd reacted instantly. That word, tow trucks, was like a thunderclap. Panic spread through the campers. I watched as men scrambled to disconnect their RV hookups. Women stuffed bags into trunks. Kids herded like cattle toward waiting minivans. The music cut off mid-song. The party atmosphere evaporated in seconds. Karen's face turned red, her eyes darting as her supporters abandoned her one by one. "You cowards!" she screeched at them. "This is our land, our fight!" But nobody listened. They were too busy saving their own hides. Within half an hour, the lot was half empty. Cars churned up dust as they sped off. Campers rattled down the road, and only a few stubborn stragglers remained. Karen stood in the middle of it all, seething, her empire collapsing around her. Daniels adjusted his sunglasses. "Ma'am, this is your last warning. Leave now or face arrest." For once, she had no comeback. She just glared at me, eyes full of fire, lips trembling with rage, then spun on her heel and stormed off toward her RV. As the last of the campers rolled away, the lot fell eerily silent. Just smoke rising from abandoned fire pits, a few crushed cans in the dirt, and the echo of chaos finally fading. Daniels clapped me on the shoulder. "It's not over," he said quietly. "She's angry. Don't be surprised if she pushes back. But for now, you've got your land back." I nodded, staring at the empty space where her festival had stood. Relief washed over me, but it was laced with something sharper, anticipation. Karen wasn't done, not by a long shot, and neither was I. For a few precious days, life felt normal again. The lot was quiet. The air smelled of pine and lake water instead of charcoal and cheap beer. I could sit on my porch in the evenings, sip coffee, and hear the crickets instead of pounding bass. But peace never lasts long when someone like Karen is involved. By the end of the week, the first letter arrived. I found it stuffed into my mailbox, printed on official-looking HOA letterhead, though I knew full well it was just Karen's desktop and a home printer. "Mr. Thompson, due to your disruptive behavior and failure to comply with HOA community standards, fines are being imposed in the amount of $1,050, payable immediately. Additional fees will accrue weekly until resolved." At the bottom was her signature, scrawled in that same dramatic flourish she used on every bogus notice. I read it twice, then laughed. The gall of this woman. After being slapped down in court, after her entire festival had been dragged off my property, she still thought she could bully me with made-up fines. I didn't even bother calling Mark about it. I just pinned the letter to my fridge, a trophy of her desperation. But Karen wasn't finished. 2 days later, another letter arrived. This one claimed I owed the HOA nearly $5,000 in back dues for shared maintenance of the lakefront. The next morning, I woke to find a neon orange violation notice duct taped to my front door, citing me for failure to maintain landscaping. Never mind that my grass was trimmed and my shrubs were neat. She was throwing everything she could think of at me, hoping something would stick. And when the paper assault didn't work, she turned to intimidation. I caught her one evening, parked at the end of my drive in that oversized SUV of hers, just sitting there with the engine idling, watching my cabin through the trees. When I stepped outside, she rolled down the window and called out, "You think you've won, John?" Her voice was sharp, brittle. "This isn't over. You'll pay every cent. And when the HOA votes, you'll be gone for good." Then she revved the engine and tore off, gravel spitting from her tires. It would have rattled me once, but now it only confirmed what I already knew. She was cornered, and cornered people make mistakes. Sure enough, one came a week later. She filed a lien against my cabin, or at least she tried to. The clerk at the county office called me personally, chuckling as he explained. "Mr. Thompson, we've got some paperwork here that's creative, let's say. Claims you owe the HOA a fortune in fees. Problem is, there's no legal basis for it. The judge already made that clear. Just thought you'd want to know what she's up to." I thanked him and hung up, shaking my head. Karen was burning through every last bit of credibility she had. And the neighbors were noticing. At the diner, conversations shifted. Folks who used to nod politely at her now rolled their eyes. Some even apologized to me outright. "Didn't realize how bad it had gotten," one man admitted. "We thought she was keeping order. Turns out she was just stirring up trouble." The tide had turned, and she knew it. That weekend, she made one last desperate play. I woke to the sound of hammering. When I stepped outside, I nearly laughed. Karen and two of her loyal diehards were out on the lot again, erecting a crude wooden fence across the property line. A handmade sign flapped in the wind. "Community property, HOA use only." She must have known the sheriff would be back. Must have known another court hearing would follow, but she didn't care. This wasn't about winning anymore. It was about saving face, about proving, if only to herself, that she still had power. I didn't even bother confronting her. I just pulled out my phone, snapped a dozen photos, and sent them straight to Mark. Within an hour, he called me back, his voice brimming with satisfaction. "She's cooked," he said. "That's contempt of court. We'll file first thing Monday. The judge isn't just going to slap her wrist this time. He's going to make an example out of her." And as I stood there, watching her hammer away at that crooked fence, I realized something. The war wasn't over, but the end was in sight. The courtroom was packed. Word had spread fast, and by the time my case was called, every seat was filled with neighbors, reporters, and curious townsfolk. Karen sat across the aisle, chin high, wearing a blazer far too formal for a county court. She had a stack of folders on the table in front of her, as if drowning the judge in paperwork would make up for the fact that none of it was legitimate. My lawyer, Mark, leaned close. "Relax," he murmured. "This is open and shut. Just let her dig her own grave." When the bailiff called order, Judge Whitman strode in. He was a no-nonsense man with silver hair, the kind of judge who'd been on the bench long enough to smell nonsense before a single word was spoken. We barely got settled before Karen shot to her feet. "Your Honor, I demand this case be dismissed. The HOA has rightful authority over the property in question, and Mr. Thompson has continually defied community rules. He owes us thousands in fines, back dues, and damages." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Sit down, Ms. Miller. You'll speak when it's your turn." Her face flushed crimson, but she obeyed. Mark rose calmly, adjusting his tie. "Your Honor, I have here the deed to the property in my client's name. I also have your signed injunction from 3 weeks ago, ordering Ms. Miller and her associates to vacate and cease trespassing." He laid the papers neatly on the bench. "Since that order, Ms. Miller has issued false fines, attempted to file an illegitimate lien, and most recently erected a fence on my client's land, in direct violation of your ruling." Whitman's eyes narrowed. "Is this true, Ms. Miller?" Karen leapt up again. "Lies, all lies. The HOA has rights." "Silence!" The judge's gavel cracked as like thunder. The sound echoed through the chamber, and the crowd went still. Karen's mouth opened and shut, but no words came. Mark continued, his voice steady. Furthermore, Sheriff Daniels can attest to the hostile environment created by Ms. Miller's unauthorized encampment on my client's property, as well as her repeated attempts at intimidation. The sheriff, seated in the back, stood and nodded firmly. That's correct, Your Honor. We had to break up what amounted to a festival on Mr. Thompson's land. There were multiple violations of health and safety, and when ordered to leave, Ms. Miller refused until threatened with arrest. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Karen clutched her folders, her composure slipping. "This is a conspiracy," she shouted suddenly. "He's turning the whole community against me. You're all blind, don't you see? Without me, this HOA will fall apart." That was her breaking point. The room erupted in whispers. People shook their heads, some outright laughing. Judge Whitman leaned forward, his expression cold as stone. "Ms. Miller, this court has had enough of your theatrics. The evidence is overwhelming. You have willfully trespassed, violated a standing injunction, and attempted fraudulent actions against Mr. Thompson. Effective immediately, you are fined for contempt of court, barred from entering or interfering with Mr. Thompson's property, and ordered to pay all legal costs and damages incurred." He paused, his gavel raised. "Additionally, the county may pursue criminal charges if this behavior continues." The gavel slammed. Case closed. Karen's face crumpled. The proud, smug woman who once strutted through the neighborhood now looked small, cornered, and utterly defeated. She tried to gather her folders, but her hands shook too badly. Mark leaned back in his chair, satisfied. "Told you," he whispered. As we walked out, I caught the eyes of a few neighbors. They nodded, some even smiling. It wasn't just my victory. It was theirs too. They'd lived under Karen's thumb for years, and now they'd seen her fall. Outside, the sun was warm, the air crisp. For the first time in weeks, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. My land was mine again. My cabin was safe. And Karen, she was finished. Later that evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee, staring out at the still lake. The silence was beautiful. No music, no shouting, just peace. I knew she'd never admit defeat out loud. People like her never do. But it didn't matter. The law had spoken. The neighbors had seen the truth. And I'd won. Summer faded into fall, and the trees around the lake turned brilliant shades of gold and red. I spent more time on my porch than ever, just breathing it in. The silence, the space, the sense of ownership. It felt richer now, after everything. Karen faded from sight. The SUV was gone from its usual spot, and her porch stayed dark. Rumor had it she'd been voted out of the HOA board altogether. Nobody seemed surprised. Folks finally realized the difference between order and control, and they weren't about to let her take the reins again. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to started dropping by. One brought a pie, another offered to help mend a section of my dock. It was as though Karen's downfall had cracked something open in people, a reminder that we weren't enemies sharing the same lake, but neighbors, bound by community. And me? I'd learned a hard but valuable truth. Owning land isn't just about deeds or fences or paperwork. It's about standing your ground when someone tries to take what's yours. It's about remembering that sometimes the fight isn't just for you. It's for everyone watching, too afraid to push back themselves. One evening, I sat with Sheriff Daniels on the porch, both of us sipping coffee as the sun went down. He leaned back, smiling faintly. "Funny thing, John," he said. "All these years I've dealt with crooks and drunks and folks who just plain lose their way. But it's people like her, folks who think rules don't apply to them, that cause the most trouble." I nodded, watching the lake ripple in the breeze. She thought she owned the world. Turns out she couldn't even own her own pride. He chuckled at that, and for a long moment, we just sat in the quiet, letting it settle. Peace had come back to the cabin, and this time, I knew it would stay. Because some victories don't just end a battle, they change the whole field, and mine had done just that.